Welcome to Sayers and Secrets. When a wealthy heiress disappears on the eve of her inheritance, the city's whispers grow louder than facts. A half-burned letter, a forgotten bracelet at the foot of a staircase, and a cryptic message left in a phone booth hint at more than a runaway. But who wanted her gone, and why does every alibi sound rehearsed? If you've ever chased answers through shadows and silence, this mystery is yours to follow. Tell us in the comments what tipped you off. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that keep you guessing. Now, pour something warm, draw the curtains close, and let the mystery begin. Chapter 1. The Unwelcome Proposal, Archie Goodwin here. If you've ever watched Nero Wolfe react to an interruption during beer hour, you know it ranks just below thermonuclear war on his personal scale of acceptable tragedies. It was 4:46 p.m., and Fritz was setting out the cold bottle of Lowenbräu when the doorbell rang, twice, impatiently. I glanced at Wolfe. He didn't twitch. His face was at full deadpan, staring into the amber ripples of his poured beer like it held the secret to eternal comfort. I stood. Shall I ignore it and risk civil unrest? No, Wolfe said, his voice flatter than Fritz's cutlets. Remove it. I headed to the front door, swung it open, and got my first look at Miss Laurel Rayner, 31, meticulously coiffed and dressed in a mink-collared coat that could have bought the entire block if she'd haggled for it. She wore anxiety like perfume. Expensive, heady, and impossible to ignore. I must see Mr. Wolfe, she said, voice sharp as crystal. Now. Do you often break appointments this dramatically, or is this a birthday treat? I have no appointment, she said, stepping past me without waiting for an invitation. I was advised you don't take walk-ins. I'm ignoring that. She stormed into the office like it was a runway. Wolfe didn't move. That's how you know you're in trouble, when Wolfe won't even bother to glare. Miss Rayner, I said gently, you're entering the lair of a man who once ejected a federal judge for interrupting orchid time. I'll pay double, she said. I'll pay triple if you'll listen. I'm not here for me. I'm here for a friend. She's missing. Wolfe didn't look up. Mr. Goodwin, please ask Miss Rayner whether she has a name or expects to be remembered as a momentary nuisance. She inhaled sharply. Her name is Vivian Blanchford. You may have heard of her. I froze. Wolfe didn't, but I could tell he'd registered it. Vivian Blanchford was New York's social royalty. Heiress to the Blanchford textile fortune, tabloid darling, and recently in headlines for a whirlwind engagement to Thad Whitaker, the golden boy of New Haven finance. You'll forgive me, I said, but Miss Blanchford was seen at the Grand Marquis Ballroom just last night, with her fiancé, swirling champagne, laughing. And this morning, Laurel said, her voice cracking, she was gone. No note, no call. Her doorman saw nothing. Her phone's off. Her car's still in the garage, and someone tried to access her private trust account 2 hours ago. Wolfe lifted his eyes. For him, that was a standing ovation. I have no interest in theatrics, he said, and no tolerance for lies. If this is an attempt to embarrass a socialite or her family in the press. There's no press, Laurel cut in. No police, no tabloids, no leaks. If her family knew, they'd circle like hawks. That got Wolfe to lean back an inch. So you're withholding from the Blanchfords? I'm protecting her. Vivian said, if anything ever looked wrong, to come here. She said you could see through smoke. I raised an eyebrow. Vivian Blanchford had a personal Nero Wolfe contingency. She suspected someone was watching her. Her emails were being accessed. She started doubting everyone. Her fiancé, her cousin, even her family lawyer. Wolfe folded his hands. Interesting, if unverifiable. But you must realize the implications of engaging me. I do, Laurel said. That's why I brought this. She reached into her handbag and produced a sealed envelope, thick, ivory, and embossed with Vivian's signature monogram, a stylized V and B interlocked like twin vines. I took it, turned it in my hands. Wolfe gestured. I handed it to him. He slid a paper knife beneath the flap and drew out a single page. Chapter 2. Wolfe read the note in silence, his lips compressed and unmoving, except for a minor twitch at the corner of his mouth. A twitch that, if you knew Wolfe well, could pass for a gasp of surprise. When he finished, he folded the paper deliberately and set it beside his beer glass, like it had offended him on a personal level. "You read it aloud, Archie," he said at last. Miss Rayner gave a nod. "I've already memorized it. Vivian gave it to me the night before she disappeared." I took the letter from Wolfe's blotter. It was high-grade ivory stationery with a faint scent of sandalwood and nerves. Vivian's handwriting was firm but elegant, the kind of script that suggests private schooling and bottled-up anxiety. "Dear Mr. Wolfe," I began aloud, "if this reaches you, it means I've disappeared, voluntarily or otherwise. I'm not paranoid, but I am observant, and someone has been altering my calendar entries, intercepting my calls, and gaslighting me about things I know I wrote down." By the time I finished reading, even Fritz had stopped mid-pour at the sideboard, holding the beer bottle as if it might drip classified information. Wolfe said nothing for a moment. Then he drew in a breath, deep and sharp. "Miss Rayner," Wolfe said, "you are aware this note implies criminal interference, potentially fraud, stalking, or worse." "I am," she replied tightly. "That's why I came here before going to the police. Vivian feared a formal investigation would be spun into a scandal or worse, an excuse to have her declared mentally unfit." "And you believe this wasn't some cry for help or melodramatic gesture?" Her jaw set. "Vivian wasn't dramatic. She was methodical. That note was written like a will." Wolfe pressed his fingertips together, templed. "You said someone attempted to access her private trust account?" "Yes. Her financial advisor called me this morning. He was locked out of her account after a failed login attempt from an unknown IP address in Midtown." "Did you report it?" "Number." He flagged the transaction and froze it. "We agreed to wait 24 hours. Wolfe gave me a glance. "Midtown?" I nodded. "Not helpful. Midtown has more devices than citizens, but it narrows things slightly." Wolfe leaned back, exhaled through his nose. That, for Wolfe, is the sound of the wheels beginning to turn. "Tell me, Miss Rayner," he said, "who benefits if Miss Blanchford vanishes permanently?" She hesitated. Then, "Her fiancé, Thad Whitaker, her cousin, Miles Blanchford, and the Blanchford Foundation Board, if they can declare her incapacitated. Her shares revert to the trust." "And do they know she suspected them?" "Only me. She trusted no one else." I pulled out my notebook. "And where were you last night after she gave you the letter?" "At the Carlyle, alone, room 903. I didn't realize she was missing until this morning." Wolfe stirred. "You're not being formally accused, Miss Rayner, but you must appreciate how this looks." She sat up straighter. "If you think I'd hurt her—" "I think nothing," Wolfe interrupted calmly. "I reserve judgment until Archie returns." I blinked. "Returns from where?" "You're going to the Blanchford apartment. You will inquire with the doorman, the neighbors, and whomever you find lurking nearby. You'll also inspect her study, specifically the calendar she mentioned. If there is evidence of alteration, bring it." I stood. "And if someone tells me to shove off?" "You will smile, as always, and then shove back with legal subtlety. Take your credentials." Miss Rayner rose too. "If you need access, I can get you inside. I have her spare key." Wolfe raised an eyebrow. "Naturally. Leave it with Mr. Goodwin." She pulled a slim brass key from her bag and handed it to me. Wolfe dismissed her with a nod, then turned his eyes toward the orchids. That was my cue. As she left the brownstone, her heels clacking like gunshots across the tile, I had a hunch. This wasn't just a missing person case. It was a chess game, and someone had already moved the queen off the board. Chapter 3. The Blanchford residence was in the kind of pre-war building where the elevator had a uniformed operator, and the doorman looked like he could recite your net worth from memory. When I flashed the key and dropped Vivian's name, I was met with a raised eyebrow, followed by a respectful nod. "Miss Blanchford hasn't been seen since yesterday morning," the doorman said, adjusting his gloves like I'd asked about the weather. "Told me she was heading to an early meeting. Didn't say with whom. She usually returns by lunch." "Anyone visit her recently? Someone who wasn't a regular?" He thought for a moment. "2 days ago, a man in a camel coat. Older, grey around the temples, but sharp. He didn't give a name. Stayed for about an hour." "Security footage? We don't use cameras inside. Our tenants expect discretion." "Naturally." I thanked him and took the elevator to the 18th floor. Vivian Blanchford's apartment door opened smoothly with the key. The place smelled faintly of lilac and paper, like someone had left a life behind in a hurry. I made a slow circuit, absorbing details. Neat, expensive, and feminine, but not fragile. She wasn't the sort to frame meaningless art or fill shelves with unread books. There was intent behind everything, from the antique letter opener on the desk to the elegant but unused fireplace. It was the kind of space that didn't scream money, just whispered it confidently. Her study was the most revealing. A desk faced the window, littered with open notebooks, a silver fountain pen still uncapped. The blotter had a few faint indentations. One caught my eye. A phone number scribbled and then torn away. I opened the bottom drawer. Inside, among the expected tax folders and charity receipts, was a leather-bound planner, and bingo, the calendar entries looked off. I flipped to the week before her disappearance. The ink on some entries was darker, newer. Thursday lunch with T.W., her fiancé, Thad Whitaker, was written in pale blue ink. But Friday's entry, a suspicious meeting was attorney, was in thicker black ink. Different pen, different pressure. I paged back a few weeks. Consistent blue. Neat. Regular. Whoever added the black entries didn't match the flow or style, and they'd only appeared recently, like someone was rewriting her life from the margins. I took the planner and slipped it into my coat. Next, I made a few calls. First was to Saul Panzer. If someone was messing with Vivian's records and movements, Saul was the guy to trace the hands that moved in the dark. I gave him the number etched into the blotter and told him to dig up anything he could on who it belonged to and where it led. Then I dialed Thad Whitaker. He picked up on the second ring. "Thad Whitaker. Goodwin here. I work with Nero Wolfe." There was a pause. "Oh, I see. I'm standing in Vivian's apartment. She's missing, and you're on the short list of people who might be interested in that fact. Care to comment? You're in her apartment? Who let you in?" "Vivian did, by way of her assistant." "Don't worry, the key isn't counterfeit." He sighed, heavy with frustration or guilt. I couldn't tell which yet. "I've been trying to reach her. She's not answering calls, not responding to messages. It's not like her. You met her 2 days ago, didn't you? Camel coat, slick hair." I stopped by for 20 minutes, just to talk. She seemed agitated. "About what?" "Her inheritance. She was convinced someone was trying to push her out. Claimed she was unstable." "And were you?" He bristled. "Number, of course not." "Where were you yesterday morning?" "Home. With my sister. She's visiting from Chicago. Look, I want her found. If she's in trouble, I'll do whatever it takes. But you're barking up the wrong tree if you think I'd hurt her." I logged that. Maybe true, maybe not. Either way, he was nervous enough to be worth watching. After I hung up, I gave the place one last sweep. Nothing in the kitchen, bathroom, or bedroom seemed disturbed. No signs of struggle, no shattered glass, no stains that couldn't be explained by spilled perfume. But in the trash, under a layer of tissue and lipstick-stained cotton, I found something Wolfe would have called a trifling anomaly. A torn-out sheet of paper, half of a typed draft, sliced cleanly. The header read, "Amendments to Trust Disbursement, effective pending confirmation of status." That was enough to make me tighten my grip on the edge of the desk. Whatever had been planned, it wasn't subtle. Someone wanted her gone, and had already drafted the paperwork to mop up afterward. I folded the torn sheet and added it to the folder with the calendar. Time to bring this to Wolfe. Back in the cab, the city blurred past in smeared neon and August heat haze. I was forming theories faster than traffic lights, but Wolfe would want facts, not fumes. Still, one thing was clear. This wasn't a simple disappearance. Vivian Blanchford hadn't just vanished. She'd been erased. Cleanly, surgically, and with motive. And I was willing to bet the person holding the scalpel was already watching us. Chapter 4. By the time I got back to the brownstone, Fritz had just finished polishing the banister with a cloth that probably cost more than my shoes. Wolfe was in the office, naturally, and had switched from beer to Montenegrin plum brandy, which meant his patience had narrowed like a banker's smile at tax time. I laid the leather planner and torn draft on his desk like they were stolen relics from a sacred temple. He didn't move. "Well," I said, "you gonna gawk at the clues or grace them with interpretation?" Wolfe sighed, reached out, and examined the planner with the same reverence he showed toward his orchids. "The calendar is the stronger exhibit," he said. "It confirms what the letter implied. Someone was meddling with her routine, deliberately and with forethought. And the torn trust amendment," he tapped a thick finger on the heading, "pending confirmation of status. Brazen. Suggests someone was waiting for a legal pretext to assume control of her assets. Or orchestrating one. Indeed." He held the planner up to the light, noting the difference in pen pressure. "You've spoken with Mr. Whitaker." He confirmed the visit, claimed it was short and civil. I didn't ask if he wore the camel coat, but the doorman's description fits. Wolfe's eyebrows lifted 1/2 centimeter. For him, that was expressive. He is, then, not only the heir presumptive, but also our most visible suspect. Motives aplenty. Control of the fortune. Protection from Vivian's paranoia, assuming it wasn't warranted. Or even the classic option, a new flame with expensive tastes. Wolfe grimaced. "You speak like a novelist." "I spend time around one." He flicked his hand, dismissing the exchange. "Call Saul." I did. Saul answered on the first ring. "Tell Wolfe the number leads to an unregistered burner," he said, cutting to the chase. But I traced the purchase. Pharmacy kiosk on East 62nd. Cash. Security footage shows a man in a camel coat, face partially obscured. Wolfe closed his eyes and exhaled like he'd just been handed a subpar soufflé. "Did you get a plate number?" I asked Saul. "No, but I've got a face. Running it through facial recognition now. I'll have more in an hour." I relayed the news. Wolfe nodded, then tilted his glass and sipped the brandy. "Mr. Goodwin, we will now summon our second circle." "Our what?" "Our auxiliary network. Contact Lon Cohen at the Gazette. Inform him that the heiress Vivian Blanchford has vanished. Off the record, stress the irregular financial activity and whisper a possible internal family dispute. The right hint at the right frequency should draw rats from the pantry." I stared. "You're starting a media fire?" He looked pleased. "I am lighting a signal flare, the kind scavengers can't ignore." That's how you knew Wolfe had shifted gears, no longer just an inquiry. This was orchestration. Controlled exposure, a prod at the city's underbelly. By 4 p.m., Lon had run a short blurb online. "Heiress disappears after charity gala, family unconcerned." subtle enough to avoid lawsuits, juicy enough to invite attention. And by 6 o'clock, the phone rang. Wolfe didn't even twitch. "Archie, if you would," I picked up. "Wolfe's office." A woman's voice, breathy and precise. "Is this about Vivian?" "Depends. Who's asking?" "This is Sylvia Marston. I was her therapist." I covered the receiver. "Therapist," I said to Wolfe. He gestured. "Proceed." "She told me something weeks ago," Sylvia continued. "At the time, I thought she was spiraling. Now, I'm not so sure." "What did she say?" "That she'd found something. A document buried in an old file. Something that proved the Blanchford Foundation had been diverting funds illegally. She said it involved someone on the board. Possibly Miles." "Her cousin?" "Yes." "Why didn't she go public?" "She wanted to be sure. She said if she disappeared, I should go to Nero Wolfe." I straightened. "You're doing exactly that." There was a pause. "Can I come tonight?" I looked at Wolfe. He rolled his eyes, but gave a slight nod. "Yes," I said. 7 sharp. "Don't bring anyone." She hung up. Wolfe drained his brandy. "We now have a motive greater than romance. Money and corruption. Power. Nothing makes a woman vanish faster than being on the verge of disrupting a male-dominated empire." It was a rare moment of moral clarity from Wolfe, and I wasn't sure if it made me feel better or worse. But I knew one thing. This puzzle had pieces moving before we even knew there was a board, and if Sylvia Marston had what we thought she had, someone was already looking to sweep her off it next. Chapter 5. At precisely 7 o'clock, the bell rang. Fritz, whose punctuality could shame a Swiss train conductor, opened the door before the second chime. He ushered in a tall woman in her early 40s, wearing a charcoal grey dress and a black trench coat she hadn't yet removed. Her eyes flicked around the office like she expected an ambush from the orchids. Sylvia Marston had the calm, measured poise of someone who dealt with neuroses for a living, but hadn't entirely managed to exercise her own. Her hands were steady, her shoulders squared, but there was a tightness around the mouth that suggested she hadn't slept well in days. "You must be Mr. Wolfe," she said, eyes settling on the big man behind the desk. "And you are Sylvia Marston. Please sit." She did, but only halfway, perching like she might need to flee at a moment's notice. "I told your assistant on the phone," she began, glancing at me. "Vivian came to me 3 weeks ago, agitated but focused. She believed someone close to her was manipulating foundation funds and altering records, systematically and over several months." Wolfe's fingers steepled. "Did she name names?" "Miles Blanchford. Possibly more. She said the falsifications were subtle, layered through overlapping charities and donor roles." "Did she present any evidence?" Sylvia pulled a flash drive from her purse and placed it on Wolfe's desk like it was a lit match. "She gave me this. Said if anything happened to her, it was to go to someone she trusted. I suppose that's you." "May I?" I asked, already reaching. "Go ahead. She used my office computer to compile it. Password protected, but she told me the code. While I opened my laptop on the corner table and began unlocking the files, Wolfe kept her attention. You kept this to yourself until today. I assumed, hoped, Vivian was just hiding out. She'd done that before. Retreats, digital detox. She once vanished to a monastery in Vermont for a week, but this time was different. Sylvia nodded. She didn't cancel her appointments, didn't notify her attorney. And she wouldn't ignore me, not after the last thing she said. I glanced up from the screen. Which was? She said, if anything happens to me, it'll look like I made it happen. But I didn't. There was a moment of silence in the room, the kind Wolfe let linger like a slow-burning fuse. She suspected she'd be made to look unstable, I said. She feared being discredited, Sylvia confirmed. And in her world, mental illness is a scandal. Wolfe reached for the flash drive and gestured for my laptop. I handed it over and he scrolled slowly, eyes narrowing. Interesting, he murmured. 2 accounts registered to non-existent charities. Donors fabricated. Disbursements rerouted. A small fortune vanished in trickles. He looked up. This is compelling, but it's not conclusive. I know, Sylvia said. She was gathering more. That's why she reached out to you. Wolfe nodded, then made the decision official. Miss Marston, you will remain in New York. Do not mention this meeting to anyone, not Miles, not Thad Whitaker, not even your own patients. Is that understood? I'm not a fool, Mr. Wolfe. Number, but you are vulnerable. She didn't argue. Instead, she rose, gave a short, professional nod, and left the room with the weight of someone who just passed the burden to someone else. When the door clicked shut, I turned to Wolfe. That's motive and method. And a trail, Wolfe added. One subtle enough that a less astute accountant might have missed it. She said Vivian compiled it on her office computer. We could check the machine for additional files. Do so. And contact Saul. Tell him to follow Miles Blanchford. Discreetly. No confrontations. Wolfe swiveled back toward the orchids, his attention drifting, which meant he'd made the next 3 moves already in his head and now required silence to arrange them. But silence, as always, was temporary. At 8:03 p.m., the phone rang again. I picked up. Wolfe's office. This is Detective Rowland, Midtown Precinct. I recognized the name. Not a friend, but not a complete meathead either. I'm calling about a Sylvia Marston, he continued. She's listed as the emergency contact for a woman we just found unconscious in the back seat of a cab. No ID on her, but matches a missing persons flyer. My chest went tight. Where is she? St. Vincent's. They're trying to stabilize her. Foul play suspected. What condition? Comatose. Severe contusions, possible drugging. Could be Vivian Blanchford. I covered the receiver and looked at Wolfe. They found a woman, possibly Vivian. She's alive. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Then the game begins in earnest. Chapter 6. I was out the door 10 minutes later, cabbing it down to St. Vincent's under a sky that had given up on pretending it wasn't going to rain. Midtown traffic had the urgency of a sedated rhinoceros, but I made it in 30. I flashed my license, name-dropped the right detective, and got waved past security like I'd just brought lunch to the mayor. The woman in room 618 didn't look like a missing heiress. She looked like someone who'd been through a very particular kind of hell and come out with nothing but bruises, a faint pulse, and the stubborn will of someone not ready to go down just yet. She was thin, pale, and unconscious. A nurse adjusted her IV drip while the heart monitor beeped at a pace that would have made Wolfe roll his eyes in annoyance. Detective Rowland met me outside the glass. He looked the same as the last time I'd seen him. Weathered suit, dark bags under the eyes, and a cigarette behind his ear like a reminder of better times. She's still out, he said, voice low. Doctors say stable, but not responsive. Vivian Blanchford, he shrugged. We're running prints, but the match is likely. A nurse recognized her from the news. How was she found? Back of a yellow cab parked on 45th. Cabbie said he picked her up near Madison Square Park. She was already unconscious. Said he thought she was drunk until she started slipping sideways and mumbling about a lawyer named Faulkner. Could be her estate attorney. I'll check. Rowland crossed his arms. No ID, no phone, no purse. Clothes don't match the missing persons report. Looks like someone changed her after she was unconscious. Drugging? Most likely. No signs of assault, but bruises along the arms and neck. Could have been restrained. I looked at the woman again. No outward signs of money or privilege. Just vulnerability. And silence. She's lucky the cabbie didn't dump her. Rowland gave a dry snort. He was 3 fares behind and didn't want to deal with the paperwork. Lucky break. I stayed for another 10 minutes, watching her, the way someone might stare at a riddle with half the words erased. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was on his second bottle of beer, Fritz hovering nearby like a sentient aroma. "She's alive," I said, "but not speaking. That is both encouraging and inconvenient." I relayed what Roland told me. Wolfe listened, his expression hardening with every sentence. When I finished, he leaned back, arms folded across his gut like he was settling into a siege. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, "summon Saul. I require both surveillance and speed." I dialed. Saul answered, already half a step ahead as usual. "You're tailing Miles Blanchford," I reminded him. "He's still at the club," Saul said, "drinking, playing gin rummy, talking to no one but the bartender. Stay on him, but when he moves, let us know immediately." Wolfe tapped his finger against the armrest. "Next, you will contact the Blanchford Foundation. Ask for the Director of Operations. Pose as an investigator hired by Vivian herself. Hint that she suspected internal fraud. They'll clam up. Of course, that's why we do it over the phone. The goal is not to acquire data, but to see who calls whom in response. Have Lon Cohen watch for sudden press releases, suspicious retractions, or strategic silence." The web was tightening. Wolfe wasn't just investigating. He was agitating the system, one string at a time. "Vivian mentioned a lawyer named Faulkner," I added. Wolfe frowned. "Not her usual counsel. She could have changed attorneys for this. Maybe someone off the Foundation's radar. Find him and verify his specialty. We must know whether he was estate, tax, or criminal." I took the list and started dialing. Faulkner, William T., appeared on the 5th try, a boutique firm on Lexington, specializing in non-profit compliance. When I got him on the line, he sounded exactly like his resume, precise, polished, and perpetually 10 seconds from ending the call. "Yes, I knew Ms. Blanchford," he said. "She approached me 3 weeks ago about a potential case of internal embezzlement within the Foundation. We were scheduled to meet again 2 days ago. She never showed." "You didn't think to report that?" "I assumed she'd reconsidered, or that she'd been warned off. These matters are delicate." "Did she give you names?" "Number only that she believed at least 2 board members were involved. 1 male, 1 female. She was gathering documentation before proceeding." "She say where the files were?" "Number." "But she asked if financial audits from the past 2 years could be subpoenaed." That was our next step. Wolfe listened to all this as I relayed it. When I hung up, he looked thoughtful. "She was preparing for war," he said, "but she underestimated the enemy, or overestimated her allies." That night, around 10, Saul called. Miles just made a move. "Where?" "Left the club. Took a cab. I followed. He went to a brownstone on East 73rd. Rang the bell. Wasn't let in. Waited. Rang again. Then walked away but left something in the mailbox." "Stay with him," I said. I passed the update to Wolfe. He pressed his fingertips together. "A delivery at this hour suggests urgency, or guilt. We retrieve it?" "Tomorrow, discreetly." He stood, slow but deliberate, and made his way to the dining room. Fritz had already plated his corned beef and wild rice. As I turned to leave, Wolfe spoke, low and certain. "She's not safe in that hospital, Archie. Want me to arrange protection?" "Yes, but do it quietly. The killer may think he failed. Let us keep it that way, for now." I made the call, and I watched Wolfe sit in silence, chewing each bite with the kind of deliberate care he reserved only for dinner. Or deception. Chapter 7. The next morning, I was out before Wolfe's eggs were even a thought in Fritz's head. My job was simple: recover the mystery item Miles Blanchford had deposited in the mailbox the night before. Wolfe didn't like surprises. He liked them even less when they arrived without postage and outside visiting hours. East 73rd Street was as awake as a banker's conscience. Barely. The brownstone in question was nondescript, ivy climbing halfway up the front like it was trying to make up for the building's lack of personality. No one watched from the windows, which made my job easier. A quiet sweep of the mailbox flap produced a small manila envelope, unmarked, unsealed. Inside were 3 folded pieces of thick linen paper and a business card. I didn't open the papers. Wolfe had a rule about evidence: no handling unless necessary, and certainly not in the middle of a Manhattan sidewalk. I pocketed the contents and made my retreat, but not before catching the address nameplate: Mrs. Thalia Renwick. The name rang a faint bell, and not the kind that served breakfast. I filed it under "To investigate" and returned to the brownstone. Wolfe was in his chair, sleeves rolled halfway as a courtesy to the August humidity. He looked up as I entered and held out his hand without a word. I passed the envelope over, sat down, and watched him unfold the contents with the gravity of a man diffusing a bomb made of etiquette and suspicion. The business card read, "Thalia Renwick, Philanthropic Advisor, former Treasurer, Blanchford Foundation." Wolfe's eyebrows climbed half an inch. A widow and a financial officer. Rarely do those two make for innocent bedfellows. He read the first letter, skimmed the second, and paused on the third. Then he handed all 3 to me. "Tell me what you see." I read them silently. All were typed, signed with a looping pen stroke. T.R. The contents were vague but laced with tension. The first spoke of concerns raised by Vivian and uncomfortable discrepancies in end-of-quarter reporting. The second warned of recent pressure from internal figures and suggested Vivian take a step back for her own safety. The third was more cryptic. "What you suspect is likely true, but be careful. There are old loyalties at play, and not all debts are financial." I looked up. She knew something, maybe tried to warn Vivian. "Or cover herself in case things went south," Wolfe said. "This is not a confession. It's a future alibi." "Want me to pay her a visit?" Wolfe drummed his fingers. "Yes. Tread carefully. Mrs. Renwick is calculating. Bring her a question she can't ignore and an assumption she can't correct without exposing herself." "Any particular angle?" Wolfe smirked. "Tell her you're following up on a scheduled transfer between the Renwick Trust and the Third Lantern Fund." "That a real thing?" "It is now." I headed back out, grateful the heat hadn't turned the sidewalks into lava yet. Renwick's brownstone door was answered by a butler who looked like he'd been trained by a retired British colonel and insulted by American manners ever since. He let me in without argument. Renwick's type always respected a suit and a bluff. She met me in a sitting room crowded with too many antiques and not enough charm. Thalia Renwick looked every bit the widow of financial ambition: sharp eyes, tighter smile, and pearls that could pay off someone's grad school loans. She wore grey silk and suspicion. "You're with Mr. Wolfe?" "I'm Archie Goodwin," I said, flashing the smile that occasionally made people forget I was asking loaded questions. "We're assisting Miss Blanchford, or rather, trying to." Her eyes flicked to the side table where a teacup rested, untouched. "She's been found. Hospitalized. Comatose. Details are scarce." She went still, then nodded once. "I expected as much. You were close? We disagreed often, but I liked her." I let that hang before sliding into my pitch. "I'm here following up on a transfer Vivian was apparently initiating from the Renwick Trust to the Third Lantern Fund. Sound familiar?" Her face didn't move, but her hand reached reflexively for the tea. That was all I needed. "I'm afraid I don't know of such a transfer," she said evenly. "That's odd. We have partial records showing her referencing it, along with some troubling correspondence." I reached into my jacket but stopped just short of producing anything. The gesture was theater and bait. Renwick bit. What sort of correspondence? I'm not at liberty to say. Yet. But it raises some questions about Vivian's financial safeguards and who might have advised her on where to move the money. She blinked slowly. I haven't spoken to Vivian in weeks. Our last interaction was terse. But you warned her, told her there were internal pressures. Her mouth tightened. She was smart, but idealistic. She made enemies easily. Did one of those enemies put her in that cab unconscious? I don't know. You're sure? No, she said. But I know this. Vivian was on the verge of outing someone. If they tried to silence her, they'll try again, especially if they think she left a trail. She did, Renwick exhaled. Then you're already in danger. I left 5 minutes later with nothing more than that, and the sense that Thalia Renwick had done what most smart people do when they're one step from exposure. She told just enough truth to hide the rest. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe listened as I recounted the whole thing. She's hiding something, I said. Of course, Wolfe replied. That's the only honest thing about her. He leaned back. We now have a web of quiet warnings, subtle threats, and a missing trail of money. And a woman who knew too much, silenced before she could speak. But she's not dead. Wolfe closed his eyes. And that may be the mistake that solves the case. Chapter 8. There are a few benefits to having Saul Panzer on your side, and most of them involve things happening fast, quiet, and legal enough to hold up in court, if slightly smudged around the edges. When I called him, he was already ahead of the curve, which is why I suspected Wolfe had looped him in before I even suggested it. By the time I returned from my parley with Thalia Renwick, Saul was sitting in the red chair with a notepad, a tired face, and an expression that usually meant he'd found something that would cost someone their life or reputation, or both. I tailed Miles Blanchford for a full afternoon, Saul said. And if he's not nervous, he's been in the game too long to show it. He took lunch at the Racket Club with Thad Whitaker, then spent 2 hours at the Blanchford Foundation's main office. Mostly alone. Didn't meet with anyone else. No strange calls. No sign he's planning to skip town. Wolfe's brow barely lifted. Does he seem aware he's being observed? But he's making fewer calls and using cash more than usual, slowing his digital footprint. That suggests anticipation, not panic, Wolfe murmured. Could be, Saul said. But I found something better. He passed Wolfe a glossy black and white photo, the kind you develop yourself when you don't want a lab clerk to become part of the evidence chain. It showed Miles standing in front of a downtown address I recognized, a private banking firm known for its discretion and lack of questions. He deposited a binder, Saul said. Leather. Thick, the kind that holds original signatures. A will? I asked. Or records. Maybe something Vivian didn't want out of the family vault. Wolfe nodded slowly. The timing? 20 minutes before you met with Thalia Renwick. I let out a low whistle. They're moving the pieces, but they don't know how many we're holding. Wolfe gestured toward the photo. We need access to that binder. Legally? I asked. Not necessarily, but discreetly. Saul gave a shrug that meant, give me a day. Then he was gone, back to the shadows that were as comfortable to him as Wolfe's leather chair was to the man himself. Wolfe turned to me. You will now call Detective Rowland. On what pretext? Tell him we have credible information suggesting that the attempt on Vivian Blanchford's life may be part of a larger pattern of fraud. Ask for a copy of her visitor logs from the hospital and request any personal effects found on her. You think something was left with her? No, Wolfe said, eyes narrowing. I think something was removed. Rowland wasn't happy to hear from me, but he wasn't stonewalling either. He agreed to send over a copy of the visitor log and a list of items found on Vivian when she was pulled from that cab. It was sparse, a cosmetic bag, a crushed mobile phone with no SIM card, and a Metro card. Nothing more, Odd, I told Wolfe when I returned. Vivian carried a leather wallet, always had her ID and a money clip. Sylvia said she'd never go anywhere without her silver monogram case. Then someone took them, Wolfe said, before the cabbie found her? He shook his head. Or after. Perhaps even during transit. I leaned on the edge of the desk. Someone needed to ensure she wouldn't wake up with anything left to say, or prove. Wolfe's eyes drifted to the orchids. When he spoke again, it was with the gravity of a chess player recognizing the trap 4 moves ahead. They failed. By evening, Fritz had served dinner, braised duck with orange reduction, and Wolfe had retreated upstairs for his post-supper silence. I was midway through cleaning up some case notes when the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Sylvia Marston standing on the stoop, wrapped in a raincoat despite the clear skies, her eyes wide with tension. I didn't know where else to go, she said, voice barely above a whisper. Come in, I said, stepping aside. She sat stiffly in the office chair, hands wringing each other like she was trying to strangle a confession from her own palms. I just came from St. Vincent's. I tried to see Vivian, but they've moved her. Moved her? She nodded. An hour ago. No notice. They said it was a private transfer, ordered by her primary medical proxy. Who? They wouldn't say. I asked to see the authorization forms. They said it was confidential. I stood up. I'll get Wolfe. He was downstairs in 3 minutes, robe billowing like an irritated magistrate, and eyes locked on Sylvia. Miss Marston, he said, did you inform anyone you were planning to visit the hospital? No one. Then someone anticipated your visit, or Vivian's condition improved enough to warrant urgent removal. Or, I said grimly, someone wanted to ensure she couldn't talk. Ever. Wolfe lowered himself into his chair. Miss Marston, you are now in direct danger. Do not return home. You will remain here in the upstairs guest room under Fritz's watch. Archie, call Roland. Inform him of the unauthorized transfer. And Saul? I asked. Wolfe nodded. Tell him to find where Vivian was taken, quietly. If she's still alive, she is the key. An hour later, Roland confirmed our worst fear. The hospital had no record of who approved the transfer. No ambulance logs, no electronic footprint. The nurse on duty swore she recognized the signature, but couldn't place the name. It was a vanishing act. Efficient, professional. Wolfe took it in with a grim frown. This, he said, is no longer a matter of charity fraud. It is obstruction, possibly attempted murder. And now, I said, we're not the only ones chasing the truth. Wolfe nodded once. Yes, but unlike our quarry, we are not burdened by guilt. We are only burdened by time. Chapter 9. Saul Panzer didn't call. He knocked. That alone was enough to set every hair on my neck saluting. The guy moves through Manhattan like a whisper, and when he knocks, it means something important and maybe unpleasant. Wants a word. I opened the front door and stepped aside. Don't tell me. They moved the binder too. Saul brushed past, his hat tilted low and his lips in a tight line. Worse, he said, handing me a manila envelope sealed with red string. This was mailed anonymously to Wolfe's name. Arrived at my box, not his. That got my attention. Who's got your box address? A short list, he said, which is how I know it's someone watching me. By this time, Wolfe was already shouting from the office, Mr. Goodwin, unless Mr. Panzer requires a room for the evening, show him in. We did. Saul handed over the envelope, and Wolfe examined the twine closure like it had teeth. Then, using the silver letter opener from the orchid table, he sliced the seal and unfolded the contents on his desk blotter with care. 3 items fell out. 1. A grainy black and white photo folded twice. 2. A short typed note with no signature. 3. A torn half of a page, legal stationery, yellowed with age, bearing the signature of one G. Blanchford. Wolfe read the note aloud, She hid it where the sun never reached. Behind grandfather's lies. Between the pages of truth. She trusted someone once, but not anymore. The rest is in the attic. Wolfe tilted his head. Cryptic, melodramatic, but not without intention. I lifted the photo. It showed Vivian, maybe 20 years younger, standing next to a man I didn't recognize. Tall, grim, dark coat. They stood in front of what looked like an old library or office study. Her face was turned slightly, mid-sentence. The man's was straight at the camera. "G. Blanchford?" I asked. "Possibly," Wolfe said, "or the grandfather she referenced." I narrowed my eyes. "This isn't just about missing funds, is it?" "No," Wolfe replied. "This is about legacy." At 10:47 a.m. I drove uptown to the Blanchford brownstone. Sylvia had given me the spare key Vivian once loaned her in case of emergencies. I figured disappearance, comatose hospitalization, and a forged medical release qualified. The house had the flavor of old money trying hard not to rot. The floors were waxed, the furniture covered, but there was a heaviness in the air like the walls remembered more than they let on. I headed up to the attic, ducking under beams and breathing through my sleeve. The place smelled like cedar, dust, and sealed secrets. After half an hour of rummaging through old trunks, I found it. A large, leather-bound book labeled Bloodlines and Testaments. Private. Tucked between pages 112 and 113 was another envelope, sealed in wax with the initials VB. I didn't open it. I carried it down, locked the door behind me, and drove straight back to the brownstone. Wolfe sat rigid as I placed the book and envelope on his desk. He did not touch them right away. Instead, he stared at the wax seal like it might catch fire if prodded. "Mr. Goodwin, your opinion?" "I think she knew exactly what she was doing," I said. "She planted that clue. Where the sun never reached, the attic. Grandfather's lies, his own genealogical book. Between the pages of truth, page 112, likely referencing a key family date." Wolfe nodded. "We will open it." He did. Inside was a handwritten addendum to a will, dated 2 months prior, witnessed and notarized. In it, Vivian Blanchford revoked a trust provision originally favoring Thad Whitaker and Miles Blanchford. Instead, she reallocated the entire sum, $4.8 million, to a mental health foundation under Sylvia Marston's direction. "Ho-ho," I muttered. "That's motive with a cherry on top." Wolfe's eyes gleamed. "And this was never filed legally. Which means someone had every reason to ensure it never would be." "Exactly." He placed the document in a safe box under lock and key. "Call Saul? Tell him to find where Thad Whitaker is having dinner tonight. I believe it's time we forced his hand." At 8:22 p.m., Wolfe did something almost unheard of. He left the brownstone. No fanfare, no outrage, no grumbling, just a clean shave, a dark suit, and a quiet nod that he was ready. We arrived at the Astor Club, where Whitaker was dining with a pair of thin-lipped attorneys who looked like they billed by the scowl. Saul had arranged for the private salon to be reserved under Wolfe's name. When the maitre d' informed them they were needed in the adjacent room, Whitaker raised one eyebrow, and then followed. He froze when he saw Wolfe seated under a red glass chandelier, legs crossed, gaze like a guillotine. "Mr. Whitaker," Wolfe said, "sit. You're about to be offered a choice." Whitaker hesitated, but lawyers are allergic to drama in public. He sat. "We know about the revised will," Wolfe continued, "the one removing you and Miles from the trust. We know it was hidden, protected, and now it's in secure custody." Thad's throat moved. "You may cooperate," Wolfe said, "and minimize the damage, or you may contest the document in court, which will result in depositions, public scrutiny, and a complete forensic audit of the Foundation's finances under your tenure." Whitaker's voice, when it came, was low and bitter. She was unstable. No, Wolfe said coldly. She was frightened. And now, thanks to your meddling, she's also missing. I leaned forward. We're not the only ones interested in what Vivian left behind. Someone beat us to the hospital, tried to vanish her. Thad paled. We can protect you, I said, if you help us find who's pulling the deeper strings. Whitaker didn't respond, but his eyes flicked almost imperceptibly toward the corner where Miles Blanchford's name might as well have been written in neon. Wolfe smiled without humor. Then let us begin. Chapter 10. When Wolfe decides to call a gathering, it's not a request. It's a gravitational event. Like planets to a sun, they come. Some willingly. Others because ignoring a summons from Nero Wolfe is more dangerous than attending one. This time was no different. By 6:30 sharp, the chairs in Wolfe's office were filled in a configuration I'd seen before. Strategic, psychological, and cramped enough to make breathing feel like confession. On Wolfe's left sat Laurel Rayner, pale but composed. Beside her, Sylvia Marston, dressed in a muted navy ensemble and visibly bracing for impact. Thad Whitaker, tightly buttoned and freshly shaven, sat across from them with a practiced poker face. And next to him, tapping his knee in a syncopated rhythm that screamed guilt, was Miles Blanchford, the cousin with a title and no conscience. I took my post near the globe, not for the view, but to keep an eye on twitchy hands and jumping knees. Fritz, ever the diplomat, had served tea and vanished like a seasoned ghost. Wolfe, seated with his fingertips touching, broke the silence. This gathering is inconvenient, he began. For all of us. For Miss Marston, who is grieving a vanished friend. For Miss Rayner, who is burdened by obligation. For Messrs. Whitaker and Blanchford, who are weighed down by business matters and impending lawsuits. And for me, because I detest repetition. He glanced briefly at me. I raised an eyebrow. Translation. Get ready, Wolfe continued, voice smooth as chilled butter. Vivian Blanchford has not eloped. She has not suffered a nervous collapse. She has not joined a cult or flown to the Riviera. She has disappeared, and we have reason to believe someone in this room either assisted or precipitated that event. A rustle. Miles shifted. I object, he said suddenly, his voice higher than usual. This feels like a trial. It is not, Wolfe said flatly. It is a sorting. Of truth from falsehood, of motive from alibi. Thad folded his arms. You can't prove anything. I need not, Wolfe replied. Miss Blanchford already has. He gestured, and I handed over the sealed legal document. The revised will Vivian had hidden in the attic. This, Wolfe said, is the storm you all feared. A handwritten amendment, properly notarized, legally binding, once filed. Laurel leaned forward. She really did it, didn't she? She did, Wolfe confirmed, and then she hid it, anticipating it would be destroyed or used as leverage against her. He let that hang a moment. Now, Wolfe said, let us examine the events of the past week in light of this. He pointed at Sylvia. Miss Marston, you were the first to raise alarm. You say Vivian sounded frightened. Why? She thought someone was tracking her movements. She said her notes were altered, that someone was undermining her sanity. And you, Miss Rayner, you corroborated this. I saw her notebook, pages torn out, entries changed. She began carrying her keys in her shoe, for God's sake. Indeed. Wolfe shifted his gaze to Whitaker. Mr. Whitaker, your behavior has been agitated. Why? Because she vanished, and everyone thinks I had something to do with it, he snapped. Not quite, Wolfe said. We believe you feared being disinherited and may have tried to intervene. Thad opened his mouth, but Wolfe steamrolled him. You had motive, you also had access, both to her and to the financials. And then there is the photo. He nodded to me. I pulled out the old photograph of Vivian and the unnamed man. her grandfather, as we'd learned. That was mailed anonymously. It served as both a breadcrumb and a warning. Warning from whom? Sylvia asked. Miles Blanchford, Wolfe said without hesitation. All heads turned. Miles actually gasped. That's absurd. No, Wolfe said. It is elegant. You stood to gain if the original trust held. You also feared being cut out. When Vivian began drafting new documents, you panicked. But you are not cruel. You're practical. You did not intend harm. You intended leverage. You can't prove that, Miles murmured. You mailed the photo to Saul Panzer's box, hoping Wolfe would intervene before anything became public, I said. You thought involving him would stall Vivian's plans. But someone else made a move first, Wolfe said. Vivian did not vanish on her own. Someone pressured her or removed her. The room went still. And I believe that someone, Wolfe said, voice sharp now, is sitting in this room and very much wants us to believe that Vivian is unstable, missing, and irrelevant. His gaze locked on Whittaker. You arranged the hospital incident, Wolfe said. You used your contacts to place her under temporary psychiatric care, an unlisted facility under a false name. That's insane, Thad hissed. It's insurance, Wolfe said, and very sloppy. Saul found her, thanks to a distinctive medical bracelet Vivian had engraved with her real initials. She's alive, and she's returning. Thad slumped slightly. I stepped forward. What Wolfe's not saying, but I am, is this. If she doesn't come back to the world tomorrow, I'll go to the press. The photos, the letter, the revised will. All of it. Miles looked like he might faint. Vivian will decide what to do with all of you, Wolfe said. She may forgive, she may not. He rose. For now, get out of my house. They filed out slowly, some stunned, some burning with silent fury. When the door finally shut, Wolfe leaned back and sighed. She's safe. She will be, I said. She's flying in tomorrow with Saul, wants tea and justice. Wolfe allowed himself a slight smile. Good. Then I shall have both. Chapter 11. There is a particular stillness in Wolfe's office that only occurs before one of his final verbal salvos. It's the kind of hush you might hear before a judge delivers a verdict, or before a violinist plays the first note of a solo that's going to silence an entire room. Vivian Blanchford sat in the red chair opposite Wolfe's desk, alive, composed, and, as Wolfe put it with rare admiration, strategically reborn. Her return, a quiet but undeniable event, had rattled our suspects like a poker table hit by a thunderclap. The morning papers hadn't said a word. Not yet. But that was about to change. Wolfe had summoned the same group back to the office, this time under different pretenses. Not inquiry, but judgment. Thad Whittaker arrived first, unshaven and looking like he hadn't slept in days. Laurel Rayner came next, her expression unreadable but her gaze flickering nervously toward Vivian. Sylvia Marston followed, keeping her distance and staying near the orchids as if they offered immunity. Miles Blanchford came last, slower than before, more careful, like a man walking through a minefield he helped build. Wolfe didn't rise, didn't gesture. He simply began. Miss Blanchford has asked me to speak for her. She is not here today as a victim, nor as a supplicant. She is here as a witness. Vivian's eyes didn't flinch. Her hands remained folded in her lap. I will make 3 declarations, Wolfe said. You may respond. You may deny, but you will not interrupt. Silence. First, Miss Blanchford's disappearance was not voluntary. She was drugged at a luncheon meeting with Mr. Whittaker and involuntarily committed to a private facility owned by a former client of Whittaker's firm. A facility with no public registry and no family notifications. Mr. Whittaker, would you care to deny this? Thad opened his mouth. Closed it. His fingers clenched the armrest of his chair. Second, The financial discrepancies Vivian uncovered, reallocations, forged donations, and falsified outreach reports, were orchestrated primarily by you, Mr. Whittaker, and assisted in concealment by Laurel Rayner. The motive? To siphon donations into a shell trust owned by a subsidiary of your corporate partners. I have all the documents. So does the district attorney. Laurel let out a short, sharp breath. That's a lie. No, Wolfe said. It's arithmetic. He tapped a single manila folder that lay centered on his desk like the blade of a guillotine. I'd made 5 copies just in case anyone got clever. Third, Wolfe continued, Miss Marston suspected Vivian's life was in danger and took the considerable risk of preserving Vivian's files, including a revised will that cut several people in this room out entirely. For that, she was nearly discredited and likely targeted. Sylvia didn't react. She didn't need to. Wolfe had just validated her completely. Vivian finally spoke, her voice clear. I'm not pressing criminal charges, yet, but I am filing civil suit, reactivating my position on the board, and dissolving the Shadow Trust. The Blanchford Foundation belongs to its mission again, not your greed. She looked at Thad and Laurel directly. You tried to make me look insane. You nearly succeeded, Wolfe interjected, calm and firm. It was a clever move. But cleverness, like cruelty, has limits. Thad stood. You won't get away with this. I'll sue you for slander, Wolfe. You will try, Wolfe said. And you will lose, because I do not slander. I conclude. He nodded at me. I moved to the cabinet, opened the drawer, and placed 5 envelopes on the desk. The contents of these, Wolfe said, are going to your lawyers, your partners, and your board members. If you have any hope of salvaging your reputations, I suggest you leave. Now. Miles stood. I never meant for this to go that far. Wolfe studied him. I believe you, but you acted with cowardice, not courage. You mailed me that photo, hoping I would solve what you could not confront. You're not blameless, but you are redeemable. Laurel and Thad moved toward the door. Thad glanced back once, saw Vivian watching him, and looked away. The door closed. Wolfe leaned back, exhaled slowly. I detest melodrama, he said. Vivian smiled faintly. This wasn't melodrama, Mr. Wolfe. It was war. And wars, he murmured, require victors. I'm glad you're one of them. She stood. Thank you. I did not do it for you, Wolfe said. I did it for the truth. She turned to me, offering a hand. And you, Mr. Goodwin, I owe you a decent lunch. You owe me a few, I said, but I'll settle for one with decent coffee. She left, stronger than when she'd arrived. No longer a vanishing heiress, but a returning one, with sharper claws than anyone had anticipated. When the room was finally empty again, Wolfe closed his eyes and folded his hands. Archie, he said, is it 7 yet? Not quite. Then summon Fritz. We will dine. And just like that, the war was over. Until the next one. Chapter 12. If there's one constant in the universe, besides the sun rising and Nero Wolfe refusing to leave the brownstone, it's that Fritz Brenner never lets a celebration meal go underseasoned. That evening's dinner was a 3-course monument to the notion that truth, once properly unearthed and served, deserves to be followed by roasted squab and a vintage Riesling. Wolfe had said nothing through the first course, a gesture I interpreted less as satisfaction and more as a temporary truce with the world's idiocies. He didn't gloat, didn't pontificate. He simply chewed, swallowed, and let his silence speak volumes. By the second course, I'd had enough silence. So, I said, lifting my glass, do we toast to the return of the heiress, the fall of the schemers, or to your ever-reliable brilliance? Wolfe grunted. Spare me. If you must toast, toast to accuracy. Fine. To accounting records and orchid-fed intuition. He lifted his own glass an inch. That was as festive as Wolfe got. The table was quieter after that, but not with tension. More like closure. Once the dishes had been cleared and Fritz disappeared into the kitchen to do whatever culinary monks do after absolving the guilty and feeding the righteous, I followed Wolfe back into the office. "You know," I said, "Vivian might actually pull it off. Cleaning up that foundation, restoring its image." "She will," Wolfe said, easing into his chair, "because she has already seen the cost of letting others define her narrative." I leaned against the edge of my desk. "You think she forgives them?" "Not at all," Wolfe said. "But she has weaponized survival into strategy. That is more effective than forgiveness." I watched him for a moment. He didn't reach for the orchids, didn't dictate notes, just sat there in that mountain-like calm, the air around him humming with conclusions. "Thad Whitaker and Laurel Rayner won't see prison," I pointed out. "White collar, minimal exposure. They'll maneuver their way into consulting gigs, reinvent themselves." "Of course," Wolfe said. "But in the world they inhabit, reputational collapse is worse than confinement. They will dine at second-rate clubs, receive invitations with caveats. They will know the gaze of scrutiny, and that will burn longer than any cell." Poetic. Accurate. There was a pause before I said what I'd been meaning to since Vivian walked out our door. "You liked her?" His eyes didn't flicker. I respected her. High praise. She possessed clarity, a rare thing. Even when she vanished to survive. Many vanished to deceive. I let that sit. Wolfe rarely extended compliments without layers of filters, but he had seen something in Vivian Blanchford, a woman presumed unstable, turned disposable by the very people who feared her most. "She said she'll return for lunch sometime," I said. "I told her you'd pretend to be annoyed, but secretly enjoy it." "I will not pretend," Wolfe said firmly. "I will be annoyed." I smirked. "Sure." The phone rang. I moved to pick it up. "Wolfe's office, Archie Goodwin speaking." "Archie," came a familiar voice. "Saul Panzer. That thing you asked about, Whitaker's, private firm. Turns out the IRS got an anonymous tip. They're sending someone in next week." I raised an eyebrow. "Anonymous, huh?" "Anonymous in theory, strategic in practice." "Thanks, Saul." I hung up. "Interesting timing," Wolfe said without needing to ask. "Justice moves in mysterious ways," I replied. "Or maybe Vivian's attorney got a little push from a private investigator with good taste in hats." "She will be fine," Wolfe murmured. "If she survives this, she will survive anything." I nodded. "So what's next?" He closed his eyes. "Tomorrow I will not speak before noon. You will not answer the door. Fritz will make sauerbraten. And you, Archie, will refrain from inviting another lunatic into my home for 72 consecutive hours." "Scout's honor," I said, heading for the coat rack. "And Archie?" I turned. "Well done." I smiled. Coming from Wolfe, that was a ticker-tape parade and a 4-star review all in one. I shut the door behind me. The city was still humming outside. Cabs sliding by like fireflies, people doing whatever it is they do when they think no one's watching. But I'd been watching. And so had Wolfe. Vivian Blanchford was back. The villains had been exposed with words, not weapons. And once again, the world was put right from a chair on West 35th Street. Until next time.